Hello, hello, and welcome to the User Research Strategist podcast. I am your host, Nikki Anderson, and I am super excited to be joined by Alaine today. Hi, Alaine.
Hi, thanks for
We
having me.
I'm super excited to have you here, and we have a super interesting topic about how you've been rebuilding a research team over the past 3 years, and I can't wait to dive into that. But before we do you mind just giving a quick introduction to the audience?
Sure. I'm a researcher. I'm now a research manager, but I'm a researcher at heart. My background is in design and I have about 12 years experience in the space. I've been working for 6 years now in fintech and I was hired as a researcher. I think it was into a team of four four researchers. And after about 3 years at the company, I found myself as the only researcher there. And so the last 3 years has been about answering some questions like what does my company need from a research team and how do we do that?
Amazing. I've also been through a very similar situation where I started on a team and then became the only researcher, and it's really overwhelming and scary.
It is. It really is. Because you have like, I guess the product org, they're thinking about the research capacity in its previous form. So they're thinking that you can do all of the things that the six-person team could do. You also inherit like a lot of tools and I guess debt because all the processes have been built for that larger team.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It's almost like people need to switch their mental model from, hey, here is a group of people to here's one person, but it's just not a thing that people can do very well, which I totally understand. It's a huge shift. And as you say, there's a lot of inheritance that comes alongside of that. So, in terms of this process that you've been through over the past 3 years, can you walk us through what it has been like rebuilding that research team? Because I have a feeling that a lot of people might be currently in your position 3 years ago or might be experiencing that.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a journey. In the beginning, I thought like I just need to do all the research. And after about 3 months of doing too many things badly, I realized that the problem was getting worse. So I was missing deadlines. I was not able to do my best work. And actually, I think the organization was losing more faith in research. And it was at that point that I realized that I couldn't just do what I was comfortable doing. I couldn't just do research to work my way out of this. And so I had to take a step back and kind of that was at the point where I stepped into the more leadership role. I spent, it seemed counterintuitive to me at the time not to spend all the time I could doing research. But at that point, I started thinking about how can we do this? How can we get through this? And in that period of, I guess, reflection on the research practice and how the research team had gotten to this point, I realized that I guess the rest of the business didn't care as much as the research team did about high quality insights. And I think that realization was a pretty big turning point for me. I went down the path of like, why does the business not care so much about research? Because we as researchers, we're like, how can you make this decision without proper research, you know? And I guess the thing is, it seems kind of obvious in hindsight, but the thing is that people have their hunches and they have their ideas. And product managers, they're really smart people and they want to build things. But more often than not, it's the CEO and they're also a really smart person and they want to build things. This is where we get asked, to validate people's solutions and acceptance that that's true. People have good ideas and they're smart and they do want validation that that's the right part. So, what's the role of the researcher when that truth is a fact? And for me, there's two parts to research, and one is supporting people to make better decisions. And the other part is I see the a research project as a journey. So people, especially when we're looking at discovery research, a product manager has an idea and they know very little about it. And I think the researcher in those situations can really take the lead on finding a path through the ambiguity. Ideally, they're assigned as small teams, so like a product manager, a couple of devs, and they go on that journey through the research project together, and they come out the other end with kind of a shared understanding of the problem space.
Yeah.
And so I feel like those are the two key things that certainly at the company that I work with, they're the two things that they really need from researchers. So I kind of worked that out. And then I was like, how am I going to do this? So the first thing I did was I started to campaign to get more resource. First of all, it was just two contractors. And so that I could continue to focus on this more strategic element and asking these wider questions about what the business really needs from a research team. With the extra support from these two contractors on like pretty mission critical pieces of work, I noticed when we completed these projects and we completed them to a high standard, people started knocking at my door again. And I realized that there's this feedback loop, this really nice feedback loop, which is you do really good research on something that's mission critical. You talk about it, other people talk about it, and people see that you've done a really good job and you've helped the team, and they want more of that. And so you get this feedback loop where every quarter I go in to do my prioritization, it gets more and more ruthless because there's more and more people asking me for my help. And then I guess I never had to campaign for more resource in my team as much as I did in that first instance getting those contractors, because when we started doing good work again, it was the product managers are kind of doing that for me.
That's so interesting because I've been in that similar situation where it's less about me actually campaigning and more about product managers or designers who are like, we need more of this. Can you please give the resources to this team? Which is a very interesting dynamic. And I'm wondering, because some people might be stuck in that in between where they're that solo researcher who's trying to almost do strategic stuff and tactical stuff at the same time. How did you go about getting those contractors, or at least maybe starting those conversations to invite more resources in?
It's really hard, especially when, when you're kind of burdened down with the amount of research that you need. And I think you need to accept that you cannot do everything on your own. And as soon as you start, it sounds really cliche, but as soon as you start saying no to stuff, people start listening. For me, it was about finding the people who would listen and also using like evidence from colleagues and of instances where research was really important, and saying like this is what we can't do. You know, making a plan of the project work, breaking it down into the different phases, and showing people how this is the work of three people. And maybe I can do the work of one and a half people, but these two things are critically important and I can't do it all. The first part is about finding the right people, because sometimes it's not your manager who can help you. Sometimes it needs to go like higher up or sideways to the people who really care about getting the results on the particular project. And the other part is like making it really explicit to people what you can do and what you can't do.
Yeah, it's almost like showcasing trade-offs. It's like, I can do this mission critical work or I can do this thing. But if I do this thing, that means that I can't do these other things that are also critical. Because as you said, this is for three people and I can maybe be one and a half people, which we shouldn't be one and a half. We should be our singular selves because that should be good enough.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's almost like showcasing some sort of trade-off.
Absolutely.
Do you want to get all of your user research questions answered, all while hanging out on your couch in sweatpants? No need to join any live webinars and hope that your question gets answered. No need to Google a million different things and sift through some scattered advice that you don't really know is valid or reliable. Not anymore. I know it sounds too good to be true, but I promise it isn't, because if you become a paid Substack subscriber, you get access immediately to a community filled with user researchers that I am in every single day answering questions. Not only can you hang out on your couch, feel less alone as a user researcher and get all of your questions answered, not only by an expert, but by a bunch of other user researchers with amazing perspectives and experience. You can do all of that on your couch in sweatpants, and I will be alongside there with you every step of the way. So join my paid Substack, get immediate access, and we can relax together solving all of your user research problems. See you there. I'm curious, how did you find, because I think a lot of people struggle with this, especially if their manager isn't the one that is able to move things for them. How did you find people who could move things forward, or people who could listen, or people who could make those kinds of decisions for resources?
Yeah, so I think it happened as well early on in this journey. I realized that my company didn't really want a research team. They didn't feel that they needed it. And at that time, I'd like to keep up to date with research and like what people in the research community are doing. But at that point, I said, I need to understand this divide between researchers and product managers. Like, I need to understand product managers and what they really want from us. And I started off by reading some of Marty Kagan's books, but I also got to know not just our product managers, but our directors of product and started to work more closely with them. And shortly after that, I ended up reporting into a director of product, and I now report into a VP of product. And I feel like initially that was a big change for me, but I feel like it's actually done wonders for the research team because instead of like us being like UX or research or over here, we're very close, so close that we're part of the product team now. And it removes that like us and them. But I think getting closer to product managers, like building relationships and even senior product leaders, but also like reading, there's a great podcast, Lenny's podcast. He does a newsletter and like the books that they recommend for product managers rather than the books they recommend for user researchers.
That's such an awesome point because I remember when I finally understood that my stakeholders were important, right? That like aha moment where you're like, oh, product managers, I shouldn't fight. I should I should maybe understand. And I remember reading Marty Kagan's books and reading a lot of product manager books so that I could truly understand the role of a product manager. And it's so important to do that because that's how, I mean, just like we understand our users, we take time to interview them, we take time to do secondary research, desk research, like really dive into their minds, but we don't always think about doing that with our stakeholders. And that's a super awesome point to like broaden that scope of the information that you're taking in.
Absolutely. I think in the old world, when I started out doing user research, it was definitely our job was to advocate for the users.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the kind of us and them or the tension came from because the product managers are making decisions based on business outcomes and the researchers are making decisions based on user outcomes. But I think in the new world, like 2024, 2025 and beyond, we're all focused on business outcomes. I feel like the role of the researcher is not necessarily to advocate for the user, but it's to help teams understand the whys. Like what we're really good at is qualitative data. And it's something that the rest of the business doesn't really have the skill. Like that's what our gold, our USP. And that becomes really valuable when we can tell people like why, when we can answer that why. But we're all coming back to those like business outcomes.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a snowball effect, right? Like if you help teams make better decisions. So if you support those better decisions with why, like understanding why, they are more likely to create something that, in essence, advocates for the user because the user is in their mind when they are creating something. And so I think, yeah, it shouldn't be single-handedly user researchers' jobs to advocate for the user. Everybody should be advocating, but we are contributing a piece of the puzzle that other people generally don't or have a harder time maybe uncovering because we're so specialized in how to do this deep research. So I really love that idea of like we are focused on business outcomes, but if we include the why, the user will be there.
Exactly.
That's really, really interesting. And I'm curious, kind of going back to the rebuilding of the team, you said that the contractors were doing some mission critical work and you were also trying to focus on more strategic work. What about some of the like tactical work in between this time? What was happening and how were teams making decisions on maybe smaller things that still needed research or less critical things? How did you help in that scenario?
Yeah. So it's at this point that I really, really weighed in on democratization, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to. It was like my only option. I tried and failed at this for a long time until I got a manager who really got behind it. I was like, we can try to democratize research, like just by like asking people nicely or saying to people that if we don't do this, we can't do this, so we can help you to do this. But we found that the quality of research that was happening was low, or it was just not getting done at all. People would say they would do it, but it was just not getting done at all. And I think at the start of last year, I spent quite a while working out how we could change the research processes that we had for the team and the research tooling into tools that would be accessible for product managers, into processes that would be accessible. We grew incredibly fast. The research team exploded and then shrank, and our processes were bloated. They weren't efficient. You couldn't expect someone to like pick up the process and do it end to end. So the researchers were so involved in everything. And to be honest, over the past year, putting like money behind things, changing the processes, changing the tooling to suit this wider user base. Now we have about 30 people in our company who can set up and run a research project. We have a handbook on the company intranet, and it's really changed the game. You can't expect people to just start doing something. So taking a step back and putting that kind of, I guess it's like a change management piece behind it, was really important. And it's so powerful now that we have the tools in place and you can see people doing it. The researchers, they have two parts to their role. The part that researchers always had, but then they have like a research partner role where they partner, and one of my researchers spends 50% of their time partnering with people to do the more tactical part of the research side of the research. So we work on, it tends to be discovery research. It's not always discovery, but we work on early stage mission critical stuff, and the product managers and the designers comfortably take the tactical stuff.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that you failed quite a lot trying to set this up. The number of times that I failed democratization is unreal. It's so difficult.
It's so difficult because everyone's at capacity, and people think, oh, I can do my own research. And then they realize what goes into a research project. A couple of times I've sat on a call with people in DevOps wanting to like repurpose our budget for tooling, or with the finance business partners thinking that, we don't need X amount for incentives. Like, this is crazy. And I just sit on a call with them and I walk them through what my team do end to end. And they're like, okay, so you need that money then.
Hey everyone, I have been taking some business courses recently and am launching a new membership that's all about how user researchers can become more business savvy, more strategic, and more of a business partner in their organizations. One of the biggest questions that I get asked is, hey, my organization isn't really mature. It has like a low user research maturity level. Please do not let the maturity of your organization dictate your user research career. That's what I did. Because I was in a lower user research maturity, I kind of let myself stagnate and I didn't really learn new things. And with that, my skills kind of like deteriorated. I lost a lot of time that I could have used to learn really, really important skills because they weren't necessarily applicable to my organization at that time. But guess what? I got fired. And then it didn't really matter what maturity level my organization was at because I was no longer there. And I wished that I had taken the time to learn some of these skills because they would have been applicable at the next places that I went into. I know that it can be hard sometimes and frustrating when you're in a low maturity organization and you want to push things, you want to learn new things, but please, please, please don't let your current organization and their levels of maturity impact your future career because I promise you, you will not be there forever and you will need the skills that you need to learn in the future. Promise, 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 especially with the user research industry changing and us hopefully moving into that more strategic space and operating more as business partners and innovation partners to our organizations. Also, if you want more details on my membership and how to become a little bit more business oriented as a researcher, check out the link that I have. And I hope that helps. And I think it's really important to be transparent about the actual process, but at the same time, making sure that you can simplify the process in a way that can be democratized. There's like a really, I feel like a fine balance between that because we don't want to simplify so much that it seems like we don't need anything, but we also don't want to make it impossible for people to follow a simplified process. And I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on, how to walk that line and how to maybe take a process and make it accessible for people who like might be wanting to run their own research?
Yeah, I think I kind of follow like the product design process. And we started out by mapping our processes and our tools. And then we're digesting it down a level. And then we're like maybe getting feedback from the head of design, from a VP of product, and we're digesting it down. So we're trying not to like remove anything from the process, but we're just trying to like bring things together. So like for researchers, like the process of synthesizing, once the research is done, you synthesize, you get like your insights, and you would work out how you need to communicate those. So that would be another, the synthesis, and then there's the reporting, and then there's like activating that report, so sharing it out. But for the research handbook, which is for non-researchers, all those three become one step. We're asking them to think about like when they're synthesizing, we're asking them to think about how they're going to communicate that to the team and digesting it into one step rather than three.
And I guess something that I've found is if people are doing research for their own teams, they can almost speed up that process a little bit because, like, if the teams are involved in it, then they're already like learning the stuff as they synthesize. So that, like, more formal reporting communication gets to be a little bit faster, right? Because you might not
Exactly.
have to go through each of those steps independently and report things to people who haven't even seen anything yet.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And so for somebody who's maybe interested in starting out with democratization or needing help from people like their product managers, their designers, their devs, do you have any tips on like a starting point for helping people get into that democratization mindset and like in a way that doesn't, because I know we as researchers can get a little bit upset about simplifying things too much to make it seem like what we do isn't that important. But like, do you have a tip maybe of people who might want to get started into getting into democratization?
The tricky bit is I feel like you have to kind of wing it in the beginning. Maybe find someone who is really interested in research in your organization or has some experience in that area and work with them to do to create a good example of how democratization can work. And you can use these examples to get buy-in from your manager. So I've always had to kind of, I guess it's like fake it till you make it. You have to show people what you can do and the value of what you can do before they're going to invest.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard in the beginning to make time to do your own work and to get people to buy in. But once you have a success story, you can use that to build on it. Try to think about why it matters. So if somebody really needs you to help them with a project and you don't have the resource, then you can kind of say, well, oh, I helped this person and it worked out really well. Like, why don't you do it? And I'll support you with that.
Yeah, so it's almost like having a case study to like showcase like, hey, this is how it worked. This was the success and these are the steps that we went through. Like, why don't we try this or why don't you try this? Oh, I like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think we should use case studies more often within our work.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Well, this has been such a fun conversation. We're just about at the end of our time, and honestly, it flies. But I'm wondering if there was one piece of advice that you would give the audience today in terms of rebuilding this team and balancing all of the different things that you might have to balance while doing that, or democratization, whatever we want to talk about. And what would that like one super actionable thing be?
I think it's the first step is it you need to take a step back. So we have, as researchers, we have our ideas about what good research is and what a research team should do. But ultimately, we're part of a big organization and working out how your organization, and it might be different in different departments, but how your organization views the research team and what the organization wants from its research team. Like, what's your role? A really good way to do this is, you can do your own reflections, but also to request like anonymous 360 feedback, like just set up a Google form and ping it out and try to get a really honest, like get to the truth of like what the company thinks of research and where you're at. And I think once you understand that, you can start to work out like what's really important, work out that 3 month plan, 6 month plan, 1 year plan. It's not going to happen overnight, but once you start from that point of truth and get really real about what your purpose needs to be, you can start to rebuild.
Yeah, I love that because we do have our own biases and thoughts, but ultimately understanding what the org thinks, what they need, it doesn't necessarily mean that if the org's just sitting there saying, all we need is usability testing, that you need to do that. But it's such important information to start to understand so that you can build good relationships and start to advance and rebuild something.
Exactly.
I love that. Amazing. Well, that's the perfect place, I think, for us to end today. Alaine, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. And I had such a fun time talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really nice to chat this morning.
Amazing. And thank you so much to all of the listeners. And I will speak to you all soon.